are now listening to the War Report Podcast Network.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the College Loop Podcast, episode 216 of the College Loop Podcast. I am Dylan Larck. Hey, boy, take on Twitter. A very sunburned Dylan Larck. You know, they say sun-kissed skin. I was punched in the shoulder and the face by the sun, so don't expect a lot of arm movement out of this arm. This arm almost got sun poisoning, it feels like. But we are here today to talk to you about the latest in Auburn football and continue the Way Too Early preview series. And I know people the title, I'm going to get to that conversation in a second. But we're going to start off with the Way Too Early New Mexico preview. Auburn's homecoming game in week 3 of the season. And I am starting to lose my voice already. So let me go ahead and there we go. All right. Yeah. So homecoming game for Auburn on September 14th at 6:30 Central Standard Time for the Auburn Tigers going against the New Mexico Lobos. The first time these two teams will ever have met each other. Auburn has played New Mexico State before. Dating back to last season was the last time that those two teams have played. But on Auburn, at least on Auburn's side, they're not playing New Mexico State this year. And New Mexico State also is going to be having a little bit of a down year because they lost all their players. But New Mexico, definitely not one of the higher end teams in the country. Definitely not even the higher end teams in the Mountain West. From a lot of places that I've seen, a lot of people are predicting this team to go 4-8, going even 2-6 in the Mountain West. So I think Auburn has a pretty good chance. It's kind of undermining it. Auburn has an amazing chance to win this game, starting off 3-0. But to go through a little bit. So going into this year, New Mexico finished 128th in recruiting, 91st in the transfer portal, picked up a lot of defensive backs trying to fill up spots from players who left. They lost a lot of defensive players to the portal last year. Going into their offense and defense, but before I do that, I just got to go to the head coach. They let their head coach go last year, brought in Bronco Mendenhall, who a lot of people may know because he was a very solid coach for BYU for a very long time. Brought BYU to 11 straight bowl games before leaving for Virginia, where he had a pretty mixed bag. And since then he left coaching just for a little bit since 2021 is whenever he was let go from Virginia. And then came back from New Mexico and definitely brought back a lot of guys on his staff who he coached with at BYU, especially his coordinators who were both coaches at BYU during his tenure there. But yeah, very solid coach. I just don't think that it's going to be that easy to bring New Mexico back to being bowl eligible. I don't think they haven't made a bowl game since 2016. But it is going to be a lot of fun to watch New Mexico's offense. Hopefully not against Auburn, but they're bringing back their backup quarterback who over 9 games had a pretty solid season as a backup. Words are hard. Devin Dampier, who spent last season as a backup, over 9 games, he had 525 yards passing, 6 touchdowns with a 63 completion percentage, no interceptions. Also was able to run the ball and got 328 yards and 4 touchdowns as well. Very solid, very athletic quarterback who is going into the spring, who went through the spring and the fall, and is going to go in the fall as the unmatched quarterback 1. But he, out of the returning starters, they only bring back their starting wide receiver and their starting tight end from last year. Caleb Medford, the starting wide receiver, going to be probably the biggest target to really worry about outside of the running back room. Last year for the Lobos had 551 yards and 2 touchdowns. Was one of the better wide receivers that they had, and he's going to stay that way. They picked up a couple of guys from the Big Ten and the ACC, Syracuse and Illinois, which I guess those two teams are basically the same teams, same color scheme and everything. But I still think Caleb Medford's going to be the starting wide receiver. I don't think any of those two guys brought enough experience to really compete with that. Their offensive line, very inexperienced. Every single one of them are seniors and juniors is what I'm expecting from the starting offensive line, but never really have been starters in their career. All of their starting offensive linemen who could have returned have since left for the portal. That's something you're going to see a lot out of New Mexico. I mean, they go into their defensive back room. A lot of the guys who didn't leave for the NFL draft and they left for in the portal. And the defense last year didn't really wow many people. Regardless, the defense ranked 99th in the country, 103rd in rushing yards given up, and 83rd in passing yards given up. Definitely, the pass game is where this defense last year, what it was their bread and butter, was like, hey, we're gonna try to shut down the pass, but run game gave up a lot of yards. But you're not really going to see Auburn struggle too much in this game. They lost a lot of talent, and New Mexico is a very hard school to bring back. I mean, it'd be one of those schools that you really try to rebuild in the college football games, especially NCAA 14 and in college football 25 coming out in just a month, actually, exactly the day less than a month. But I'm really glad to see Auburn kind of get their easier games out of the way. That way you kind of have a feel for your players and your schemes. And of course, they have a couple more easy games going on down at the end of the season with ULM and Vanderbilt. But 3 games in, I like Auburn starting off 3-0, going into Arkansas in week 4, which we'll be talking about next Tuesday. Obviously, I think Auburn's going to win this game. It's not going to surprise many people that I think Auburn's going to win this game. Hopefully, it's not a New Mexico State thing. Hopefully, it's getting revenge on the state of New Mexico in general. Put up 60 points. Don't give up a single one. I think Auburn wins this game. I want to say it won't be a 60-0 game. That's kind of the reserve for the week 1 games. I'd probably say Auburn 49. New Mexico, let's go 6. They have a pretty good special teams unit. But yeah, Auburn starts off 3-0 going into Arkansas. This is the easiest 4-game stretch of the season. And it just gets after next week, really, it's going to get a lot harder for the Tigers. But yeah, that's my way too early series preview for New Mexico week 3, and it's homecoming. So don't forget to get your tickets for homecoming. And just so you know, we are only 72 days away from from Auburn football. I keep saying college football, Auburn football returning. Of course, 65 days away from football returning. If you're a week 0 nut like I am. And then going into the next conversation I want to have, there's been a lot of hype around Julian Lewis and Juju Lewis, regardless, he deserves all the hype in the world. He's a top quarterback in the class 2025. Whoever he does sign with is going to get an absolute stud who's going to show out for 3 years. Is what I'm going to say. But Auburn fans, I've been looking around on Twitter, kind of talking about it because I mean, as someone who follows Auburn recruiting, probably way more than the average Auburn fan does. And an Auburn fan who probably pays more attention to a lot of things than the average fan does as well. I find it kind of weird how everyone's kind of moving past the Walker White era. Everyone's kind of skipping ahead to what Auburn could do with Julian Lewis. What does the starting lineup look like with Julian Lewis? What if Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, and Bryce Kane, the Freeze 4, are right there with Julian Lewis? And I always find that weird because we just spent the entire offseason talking about the quarterback of the future and Walker White, and why Walker White's going to be a star, why Walker White's going to lead this team in 2025, why Walker White's going to do this and that and that. And then as soon as Julian Lewis kind of shows interest in Auburn and interest into potentially flipping from USC, it's immediately, what is Julian Lewis going to do in 2025? What's Julian Lewis going to do in 2026? What is the future of Auburn football look like under Julian Lewis? Which, of course, it's like getting the new iPhone. You kind of get the new one for a year, and then you kind of just go on to the next one. But I find it weird to do that with the recruits like this because I mean I've said it before on the show. I've been on the live stream. I've said this before about kind of not being upset if Julian Lewis doesn't flip to Auburn, if he doesn't sign with Auburn, of course, that means that the class will jump up to the top 3, probably without a doubt. But I always find it weird kind of skipping ahead. And of course, you don't want to put too much emphasis on the quarterback of the future, especially if a guy is unproven. Because, I mean, Auburn fans have done that for years and years and years. But I just find it odd to sit down and overlook Walker White, overlook the first quarterback of the future of the Hugh Freeze era, the guy who was one of the guys who Auburn kind of took from a Power 5 program in Clemson. Just looking at that and then looking at going in the next year. And of course, you want to get a quarterback every year pretty much in your recruiting cycle. You want to get those guys who are going to develop later on into stars. But I don't see a world where Auburn tries to put too much emphasis on recruiting Juju and not pick up guys who can who can pretty much go into 2026 and 2025 as guys who could get into the starting lineup immediately, guys who can fill up holes in the defense, fill up holes in the offense, pick up more offensive linemen, get more wide receivers, get more tight ends, get more defensive backs, get more linebackers. I just don't see. I mean, again, I goes back to I love Auburn recruiting. I love making the graphics for Auburn recruiting. I love watching Auburn be this heavy hitter in the recruiting world, to be this team that Alabama has to worry about in the state, have to be a team that Georgia has to worry about recruiting on the state line, and just the entire world, entire country has to realize, hey, we're recruiting against Auburn. We're recruiting against a team who has had the recent success of like us, but they can recruit. They have a program that can be sustained and win football games and win championships. I love seeing that. I love that USC is even worried about the chances of Auburn taking 2 of their top recruits. I mean, they've already had a defensive line in Isaiah Gibbons decommit, and I'm just not too privy on the skipping over Isaiah Gibson. Sorry. I know I just completely butchered his name. But I'm just not too hyped up on skipping a quarterback of the future and moving on to the next quarterback of the future only a year apart. That just feels weird to me because you're setting up a Holden Geriner situation again. You're setting up just moving on past this guy and going to the next guy without ever seeing what the last guy could do. And of course, I've never been like a huge Holden Geriner truther either, so I can't speak too much on that. But that's what you're getting. That's what you're setting up. That's what you're expecting to see whenever you're recruiting guys who, Walker White was a 4-star, Juju's a 5-star. So why should the 5-star start over the 4-star? And it gets to that. I mean, I know it kind of comes out as like me just complaining about the thing about that, but it does kind of irk me just because talking about Walker White throwing to Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, Bryce Cain, all these guys, and then just 2 months later, it's imagine Juju Lewis throwing to Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, and Bryce Cain. Like that's what bothers me about the world of recruiting in that way. And I get you want to just move on to the next big thing. You want to get every single 5-star recruit that's out there, and you want to get the brand new Ferrari out, and you're like, oh well, the last year's model was really good, but this year's model is a new one. That's what it feels like to me, and I understand. Again, I'm kind of like repeating on myself. I understand the world of you want the 5 stars, you want the number 1 quarterback in the class, you want this, you want that. I'm just not okay, I guess, with Auburn fans wanting to skip ahead the Walker White era, and especially after a lot of people that I've talked to have been very high on Walker White, and the fan wise at least have been very high on what Walker White can do, and the ceiling of Walker White, and just watching him go out and play and look pretty good at 8A. I don't think he looked bad. I mean, he looked like a freshman, which is not that's not a what's the word I'm looking for here? An insult. That's what I'm looking for. He looked like a freshman. That's what freshmen should look like. Freshmen should look like freshmen. And he was not going to go into this year as a starter. He's going to go into next year as the guy competing immediately for quarterback 1. He's going to go competing against Hank Brown and potentially, who, if Auburn picks up a quarterback in the class 2025, you'll get that too. I'm just I'll kind of wrap it up just with be patient. I mean, I'm not going to say I think Auburn's going to get Juju Lewis. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's very much a long shot. Even Juju's come out and said that he's still 100% with USC. I expect Auburn to still have a great recruiting class without Juju. I think it's still going to be a top 5, top 3 class for the 2025 class. And that's saying class a lot. But don't skip ahead of Walker White. Walker White is going to be a great quarterback for Auburn. He's the first guy that Hugh Freeze wanted. He's the guy who really helped build up this class. He was one of the heavy hitters for Auburn recruiting going in for last year. That's just what he brings. He loves Auburn. He wants to be at Auburn, and you get that from him. And you can't just skip ahead on him. And I know that you always want to have a safety blanket. You want to always have a guy who you can look to if this guy doesn't work out. But don't just throw out what you just brought in. Don't skip ahead of what is to come. The class 2024 is going to be a building block class that gets Auburn back into the national realm of competing for championships, competing for New Year's Six bowl games, competing for the playoffs because there's more spots available now, so less room for error. Just Auburn fans as a whole, just don't get too upset if Auburn doesn't get Juju. I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world. Still have Walker White, and worst comes to worst, Auburn has been picking up guys in the portal. I don't know if Auburn will pick up a quarterback in the portal in the future. Hugh Freeze has been kind of on the side of, I'm not going to spend $1 million for a transfer if I can just develop the guys that I have. When Peyton Thorne leaves and get the end of the year, you're going to have to get a quarterback to fill up the roster spots that are going to be gone. I don't think Hank Brown's going to leave. I don't think Walker White's going to leave, but Holden Geriner, I think I think he's going to be transferring after the end of the season unless he's auto-bidded the starting quarterback job in 2025. But Walker White's going to be right there in the realm of competing for that job. But don't let me give him a year. So that's my message. That's my little rant. I got to get it out there because it's been kind of irking me about just Auburn fans in the recruiting world. Don't be upset if Juju Lewis doesn't commit. Don't forget that Walker White is still on this team, and don't forget that he is a building block, and he's going to be the quarterback of the future. And believe me, if Auburn gets Juju Lewis, I mean, it will be a talking point as well. I think that it'd be a fun quarterback battle, seeing the two QBs of the future from the class 2024 and class 2025. And of course, you want to be that program that brings in constant 4 stars and constant 5 stars that want to play for your team, but not play right away. But it just kind of bothered me that people were saying that if Juju comes, he's immediate starter. He's the immediate guy right away. Just a move over Walker. Here's Juju. That's what the Auburn fans I've been seeing on Twitter have been like. So don't be heartbroken if Juju moves on and stays with USC. Auburn still recruiting quarterbacks. I know there's been a couple of guys, class 2026, Auburn's been looking at. Just be patient. Don't get upset. And don't forget, Walker White is the quarterback of the future. But again, not going to be too upset if Auburn does get Juju. A 5-star quarterback who looks great on the class. Let's just not skip over what Auburn has right away. But with that, going to go ahead and move on to the remaining talking points of the show, which is Auburn Baseball. We'll get to that after the ad break. Just so you know, if you are liking the show right now, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Leave your thoughts. Do you like Walker White's chances as the starting quarterback for the Auburn Tigers? Would you prefer Juju Lewis as the starting quarterback of the future? Let me know in the comment section below. But with that, let's get into the ad read of our merch. So if you've already liked, comment, subscribed, and 5-starred us on podcast and did all this stuff, shared this with a friend. There's other ways you can support the show as well. There is the College Loop merch, the Feelin' Loopy t-shirt, and the College Loop hat, which I'm wearing right now. So with that, let's get into the commercial, and we'll be right back with Auburn Baseball.
Are you tired of having to rummage through just clothes after clothes after clothes looking for something to wear? Are you tired of your friends making fun of you for your terrible fashion sense? Well, do we have the shirt for you? Go to thewarreport.com, get your laptop out and do it right now. Go to the shop and get your very own Feelin' Loopy t-shirt as well as your College Loop hat, and you can get both of them for only $25 each. Plus shipping and handling, of course. But with that, now back to your regular scheduled program.
So, yeah, the College Loop hat and the Feelin' Loopy t-shirt, both $25 on warreport.com. So go check those out. Link in the description below for both of those things. And I just moved my shoulder a little bit, so that hurt a lot. But Auburn Baseball has been doing a lot of work in the recruiting world, picking up 2 young transfers, and one of them being a top 10 prospect per on 3 in Mason Koch from Creighton. Last year for the Creighton Blue Jays, had a 3.29 ERA with 5 wins and a loss, appeared in 25 games, pitched 38 innings, and was just a very solid pitcher for Creighton. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to come in right away and could be a guy that competes for the starting pitcher job. That's just how good I think he is. He's young. He's going to be going into this year as a junior. He's just very, very solid. Had 3 putouts last year. Had a fielding percentage of 1, which is the best you can possibly do. He was very, very good. Gave up a 2.26 batting average. Just solid 60 strikeouts after his first year as a freshman, only having 1. I love that Auburn is picking up all these transfers right away. There's going to be a new look team going in the next year, and the bullpen was like the worst part of Auburn baseball last year. So picking up a guy like Mason is really good and really showing the growth and trying to get better that Auburn baseball has to do going in the next year, especially Auburn shouldn't be missing the postseason. So hopefully return to that next year. We're going to do that with a lot of new faces, a lot of transfers, especially with Bristol Carter also coming in out of East Carolina. Coming in as a rising sophomore last year for East Carolina, was a 2024 freshman All-American, second teamer, as well as a 2024 AAC All-Freshman selection. I know I'm probably going to say the years in there. But Bristol last year for the Pirates batted a 3.46, brought in 30 runs, had 31 RBI, only had 2 home runs, not like a power hitter, but 4.4 slugging percentage as well as a fielding percentage of 9.87. Going to be playing in the outfield. Auburn lost a couple of outfielders to the portal and going to be losing some of them to graduation as well. Very, very solid 2 pickups. I think that picking up guys who were younger, coming from teams that were solid last year, is going to be very nice for Auburn. But a very, very, very solid 2 transfer pickups for Auburn baseball. A team that desperately needs guys like that, especially since Chris Stanfield, who we've mentioned a couple of times, has been the biggest transfer to leave Auburn this offseason, has since committed to LSU, which does in fact suck that Auburn will be playing him next year. But wishing the best of luck. Hopefully he has a great season while LSU doesn't have one. That's just it's always going to be how it is whenever Auburn players leave for rivals. Except for one, of course, Aiden Holloway. I hope he has a bad season. Plus Alabama has a bad season. But LSU, as long as they have a bad season, Chris Stanfield has a good season, I'm okay with that. I'm content with that. But yeah, 2 good pickups for Auburn baseball. Very excited to see how their season goes in the next year. But with that does it for this installment of the College Loop Podcast. I'm a Sunburnt Dylan Larck. at your boy Tank on Twitter. Of course, you have Instagram as well at Dylan Larck at DYLENLARCK. And of course, you have me right here on the College Loop podcast, which should like, comment, and subscribe. Again, leave your thoughts on Auburn recruiting. Do you think Juju Lewis will be the starting quarterback if he does end up flipping to Auburn? Do you want to put trust into what Hugh Freeze can do with Walker White, especially going into would be his second year being developed, I guess. Good second offseason being developed by Hugh Freeze. And of course, if you are tired of seeing my face, completely understandable. I get tired of it sometimes but not a lot. So I listen to the audio version of the show as well whenever I want to re-listen to myself talk on Spotify Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Sports, Amazon Music. And of course, all that being said, don't forget to follow us on social medias on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, the works. All of us at The College Loop. And I almost forgot about that again. But of course, all that being said, thanks for tuning in to the College Loop, War Eagle, and this has been the College Loop Podcast.